Psalm 98 reveals to us a God who acts decisively in human history to reveal his salvation and his redemption. It teaches us what all of Scripture teaches us, that history is not just the sum total of human affairs or the affairs of nations, but that history is ultimately defined by God's intervention in history to save and redeem his people. And we see this time and again throughout the life of Israel, that God intercedes and intervenes and redeems and rescues Israel. And as Christians, we believe that this culminates in the life, the death, and the resurrection of Jesus Christ, that is the center of all of history, that God acts decisively in history to save and redeem humankind and all of creation, that God has intervened once and for all in Jesus Christ. And Jesus stands at the center of human history. It's a rupture that happens, that all that has come before flows toward the cross of Jesus Christ, and all that comes after is defined by it. It flows from it, that all flows towards it and all flows from it, that Jesus, his life, death, and resurrection, stands at the center of human history. There are many ways that we make sense of history. History is nothing less than the stories that we tell ourselves that help us find our place in the world. We tell stories about the past to help us situate ourselves, to make sense of what has come before, and to help us know where we're going and to find our place in the midst of all that. We do this as families. We sit around the campfire, the family campfire, and we tell the family stories about those who have gone before us, our grandmas and grandpas and great-grandmas and grandpas and great-aunts and uncles who help us to find our own place, that help us make sense of our own existence and make sense of our own place within our family and within our communities. We do this as nations. We tell stories about our past as a people that help us make sense of who we are as a nation and where it is that we're going. And there's many ways that we interpret these stories. We don't always interpret them the same. Some of us interpret these stories as stories of great men and great women who have acted heroically and decisively in a moment of crisis, and their heroic action changed the course of human history, or maybe changed the course of your family's history. Others of us, or at other times, we might interpret those stories as stories of endless struggle and warfare and strife, and maybe especially so in class or socioeconomic terms, that the history of the world can be summed up as an endless struggle between classes of socioeconomic difference. Another way, and this is maybe one of the most dubious ones, but another way that we often talk about history, and you hear this a lot, is sort of this endless march of human progress and greater freedom. And so we start out kind of as this primitive species and now we've ended up here in our own time as this advanced sort of modern people. But any of us can just look around the world today, or even look at the history of the century before us, and realize that we're not as advanced as we think we are. But that's one of the ways we talk about history, is this sort of endless march towards greater human progress and freedom. So there are all these ways that we interpret the stories of the past. But no matter how true or not true any of those ways are, the Bible tells us that human history is not just the sum total of human affairs. It's not just the sum total of great men and great women who've acted decisively. It's not just the sum total of endless class struggle and class conflict. It's not just the sum total of nations and their wars that they've waged. That human history is ultimately defined by God's intervention to save and redeem his people. Again, he has worked and done marvelous things with his right hand and his holy arm. He has brought about his salvation. And so as Christians, we see that God's right arm, his holy arm, his right hand, has intervened in Jesus Christ to bring about salvation for all of the world, for all of creation. And that is the decisive event of human history. No matter how much all the other stuff is true, history is made up of the affairs of nations and of men and women. Scripture is full of that sort of history, all the nitty-gritty details of palace intrigue. Scripture has plenty of that. But that's not ultimately what defines history. What defines history is God's action, his intervention within the affairs of humankind, within the history of creation, to save and redeem his people. And this is good news, right? This isn't, again, it is the work of God. It's not something that God said, well, you do 50% and I'll do the other 50%. I'll meet you halfway. I'll do a little bit, you do your part. it's God's decisive and complete and total action. In Jesus, God has initiated. It's his initiation, and he sees through it to the end, all the way to the end. It's God from beginning to end. He brings about his salvation for us, and so it's not our work, though we get all the benefits of it. That's the gospel of grace, the good news of Jesus Christ, that it's not our work, but we get all the benefits of what God has done in Jesus Christ, and in his coming among us in Jesus, his going to death on the cross, his rising from the grave in victory over sin and death. We get all the benefits of that. And so this is good news, that we can look at the history of the world and we see it not just as this sort of enclosed bubble of kind of this endless news of despair, of nations warring with nations, and of tyrants and dictators and oppression and evil and injustice, though there is all of that, but that we ultimately know that the history of the world, the history of humanity, is defined by God's redemption in Jesus Christ. Or to bring this home closer, in your own family, maybe you look back on the history of your own family and you wonder, there's so much brokenness and sin, and you can't even imagine what it would look like for your families to be healed and to be made whole. And to know that the decisive truth about you and your family is that God has acted in Jesus Christ to save you, to redeem you, that his salvation has been made known. He has moved. He has done a marvelous thing with his right hand, by his right hand and his holy arm. He has come to save and redeem you.